Good evening and welcome to WEHI's virtual 2021 Annual General Meeting. I'm Jane Hemstritch and I'm the President of the WEHI Board. Today is the first day of National Reconciliation Week, and in the spirit of reconciliation, I'd like to acknowledge that I am speaking today from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. Aboriginal people have lived across Victoria for over 1,000 generations, maintaining complex societies with languages, kinship systems, laws and spiritualities. Aboriginal people are the original inhabitants or first peoples of this land. I'd like to pay my respects and offer the respects of the WEHI Board to these traditional owners and custodians of this land, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I also pay my respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples from other communities who may be with us today. Welcome, and thank you for joining us online. We had planned to welcome you in person this evening, but that wasn't to be. So I hope this finds you well, wherever you are located. I'd also like to extend a very warm welcome to our patron and Honorary Governor, Sir Gustav Nossel, and Institute members, donors, bequesters, alumni, current and past members of the WEHI Board and subcommittees, consumers, WEHI staff and students, and special guests. The minutes of the 2020 Annual General Meeting held on the 14th of May have been distributed to Institute members. I now call for any questions from Institute members on these minutes. You can ask questions in writing via Slido, and they will be read out here for us to answer. We have no questions, so I'd now like to move a motion to approve the minutes of the Annual General Meeting held on the 14th of May 2020. Could I please ask an Institute member in the auditorium to second the motion? Rob Wiley?
I'd like to second the motion, Madam President.
Thank you. I declare the meeting minutes of the 2020 Annual General Meeting approved. I don't think any of us will forget the past 12 months since our 2020 AGM. In fact, the events of the last few days, today in particular, remind us that we continue to face unpredictable times. People in Victoria, other parts of Australia and around the world have lived through some of the toughest months of the pandemic, and I would like to extend my thoughts to everyone who has endured difficult times, including those for whom the situation is still challenging. And many of our audience will be in the same situation as me, having received a dose of the vaccine which will protect us and our loved ones from COVID. For WEHI, 2020 was also a challenging time. Many of our staff and students couldn't attend work as much as they would have wanted. At times, our building was only occupied by a skeleton staff of essential workers, including our COVID-19 researchers who have worked so hard to contribute to the global research effort that has helped to combat the pandemic. Last year, you heard from Professor Mark Pellegrini and Associate Professor Wai Hong Tam about their COVID-19 research projects, and I'm thrilled to report that these have progressed very far during the last 12 months. Just last month, Wai Hong's team published a paper on their discovery of potential biologics therapies for COVID-19, which is a fantastic achievement in researching a disease that only 18 months we didn't know existed and didn't have a name for. WEHI's coronavirus research programme, which came together so rapidly in early 2020, would not have been possible without the generous and encouraging support of so many in our community. I'd like firstly to thank everyone who donated to WEHI's coronavirus research. Thank you for your generosity and your belief in our researchers. Secondly, I'd like to acknowledge the significant funding contributions made by the Victorian and Australian governments. As many of you would be aware, traditionally, government research funding has been a slow process. Detailed applications need to be submitted and reviewed before a decision can be made, and understandably, this can take quite a few months. In 2020, the speed of the pandemic didn't fit these sorts of timeframes, and both the Victorian and Australian governments stepped in with critical and urgent funding for key research projects. The Australian government's funding largely came through the Medical Research Future Fund, an important and adaptable new addition to Australian research funding landscape. I was very pleased to see in the federal budget earlier this month that the MRFF has now been fully capitalised at $20 billion, enabling it to continue to operate at its full funding potential, which is wonderful news. Despite the challenges of the pandemic and the new focus on COVID-19, in 2020, WEHI's researchers made significant advances in their research into a range of conditions, including cancers, immune diseases, malaria, and developmental, degenerative and neurological conditions. Some of these projects have used the National Drug Discovery Centre, which was opened 14 months ago, and is already producing some promising leads towards new medicines. Please join me in congratulating all the researchers at WEHI and the professional services staff who supported them, who persisted despite the challenges of 2020. Thank you all for your fantastic contributions to improving the health of our community. 2020 was also a momentous year at WEHI with the launch of our new brand. The new tagline, Brighter Together, exemplifies so much of WEHI, and I hope that tonight's AGM and the annual report reinforce to you that we really are a place where incredibly bright people come together to take on the big challenges and help us all live healthier for longer. This is, of course, a partnership with many beyond WEHI, and I'd like to extend my thanks to all those who generously supported WEHI's research in 2020. We welcomed many new donors to WEHI and also continued our Consumer Buddy programme, which matches people who have been impacted by a disease with a relevant researcher. I know that it's support like this that gives our researchers a boost and helps them to make the next discovery. Thank you to everyone who helped make WEHI brighter together. This evening, we will be thanking several retiring board members for their valued contributions to WEHI and welcome a new member. First, I'd like to extend my sincere thanks to my recently retired Vice President, Mr. Terry Moran. Terry had been in this role since I began as board president 2 years ago, and we both joined the WEHI board in 2013, only a month apart. Terry brought a wealth of experience in government relations, policy development, and philanthropy to the board, and I have valued his wise counsel and contributions. Professor Sir John Saville became our new Vice President in March. Thank you, John, for agreeing to take up this role, and I'm looking forward to continuing to work closely with you. The other changes relate to our University of Melbourne representation on the board. Professor Satish Kapoor, who held the role as well as Dean of the University's Faculty of Medicine, Dentistry and Health Sciences, was announced as the new President and Principal of King's College London at the end of 2020. I firstly congratulate Satish on this prestigious appointment, not least because it's my alma mater, and wish him all the very best in this role. Satish's rich range of expertise and thoughtful insights were a great asset to the board, and I'd like to thank him for the very many contributions he made over his 3.5 years of service. Our new University of Melbourne representative and the new Dean of the Faculty of Medicine, Dentistry and Health Sciences is Professor Jane Gunn. Jane is a brilliant clinician researcher who brings a wealth of experience in research and leadership from both Australia and the United Kingdom. Please join me in welcoming Jane. Thank you also to all the other members of our board for all your hard work, often done remotely in the last 12 months. It's been a huge year for WEHI, and there have been many important decisions to make. I have been so grateful to all our board for their generosity, thoughtfulness and expertise, which have ensured a smoothly run organisation. WEHI's 2020 annual report is available online, and I hope you'll enjoy browsing it. The report comes with a virtual interactive display that is activated by using your smartphone. I hope you have as much fun using it and exploring some amazing images as I did. It gives me great pleasure to formally move that the annual report for the period ending 31 December 2020 be received and endorsed. I now call for any questions from Institute members in relation to the annual report. You can ask questions in writing via Slido, and they will be read out here for us to answer. I'll pause for a moment to let anyone enter in their question.
No questions, Jane.
Members, I'm kind of disappointed. Last year, virtually, we had several questions, but it seems that this year there are none. So I now put the motion to Institute members to receive and endorse the annual report for the period ending 31 December 2020. Members, please place your votes via the polls tab on Slido. I'll pause here for another moment to allow our members to vote.
A number of members have voted, Jane.
Thank you. I declare the resolution carried, and I now hand over to our Treasurer, Rob Wiley.
Thank you, Jane, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm pleased to present the Statement of Financial Position, the Statement of Profit and Loss and Other Comprehensive Income, the Statement of Cash Flows, and the reports of the Directors and of the Auditor in respect of the 12 months ended 31 December 2020. With COVID-19 impacts occurring from early 2020, many of the economic impacts of the virus are reflected in this year's financial statements. However, we expect a downturn in investment income to continue through the medium term. So as a result, there will likely be financial impacts for WEHI beyond 2020 from COVID. These financial statements include some further information in Note 1 on page 6 about the expected impact on WEHI of COVID-19. Despite the impacts mentioned earlier, we have concluded that there does not currently appear to be either any significant impact on the financial statements or any significant uncertainties with respect to the events or conditions which may impact WEHI's ongoing financial viability, either at the 31 December 2020 or subsequently as a result of the pandemic. So whilst the situation is concerning, we have every reason to be optimistic for a bright future for WEHI. We're very conscious of the need to preserve our investment capital base. Our philosophy continues to be in the market for the long term. In December 2020, over 38% of our investment portfolio was in defensive assets, such as cash and interest-bearing securities. In addition, WEHI holds significant cash reserves set aside for operating purposes. Acknowledging the uncertainties we are presently experiencing, I would now like to present our financial results for the 12 months ended December 2020. The net surplus for the financial year was $31.4 million, compared with the $21.1 million surplus for the 2019 year. The 2020 surplus included an additional net milestone receipt of $36.7 million relating to the venetoclax monetization. In 2019, this was $25.5 million. It is great to see that WEHI is benefiting from the monetization of venetoclax and from the strong sales growth being experienced. WEHI's total revenue for the year was $182.1 million, which included $83.1 million of operating revenue for research and a very pleasing $27.1 million in donations, of which $15.6 million was received for scientific equipment and capital works. WEHI was also very grateful to receive $19.97 million in support from the federal government through the JobKeeper program. We have ensured this funding has been used to preserve jobs at WEHI, and the funding has allowed us to minimize the impacts of COVID on our research program, including our COVID research program. 52% of WEHI's revenue was received from state and federal governments. 18% was received from donations and other philanthropic sources. 14% was from investment revenues, with the remaining 16% from a range of other sources, including royalty-related income. 72% of the WEHI's expenditure was scientific-related. 5% was infrastructure and building-related, and 11% was expenditure relating to the delivery of WEHI's strategic initiatives. The remaining 12% being used to provide the professional services needed to support our scientists and WEHI's activities. We are very well supported by the financial community, and I would like to acknowledge the contributions of Fiona Trafford-Walker, Stephen Milburn-Pyle, Stephen Merlichek, and Andrew Scott, who voluntarily serve on our investment committee. I would also like to acknowledge J.B. Weir and specifically Adam Blennerhassett and Curtis Reed. Thank you all for guiding us through these difficult times. As chairman of the Audit and Risk Committee, I would also like to express my appreciation to the members of this committee, Malcolm Broomhead and Pippa Connolly, for their work on this important committee, which advises the board on its financial stewardship of the organisation and which provided oversight of the preparation of these financial statements. WEHI's finance team should also be recognised for their efforts in providing sound financial management of WEHI's resources. As always, infrastructure funding is vital, and we are pleased to acknowledge the ongoing support of the Victorian and federal governments in this regard. The external audit performed by Deloitte Touche Tohmatsu progressed smoothly, and there are no matters of major concern. A Deloitte representative, Annika Detoid, is available and can answer questions members may have on the audit. Members of WEHI, I now move that the Statement of Financial Position, the Statement of Profit and Loss and other comprehensive income, the Statement of Cash Flows, the Statement of Changes in Equity, and the reports of the Directors and of the Auditor for the financial period ended 31 December 2020 be received. WEHI members, are there any questions relating to the financial reports? Questions can be submitted via Slido. I will pause at this point.
No questions, Rob.
Thank you. I now put the motion to WEHI members. Please cast your votes now. Votes can be submitted via the Polls tab on Slido. Again, I'll pause.
Votes are received in favour.
Thank you. I declare the resolution carried. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and I will now hand over to Professor Doug Hilton, who will present the Director's report. Doug.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Jane. Today marks the beginning of National Reconciliation Week, and I'd like to echo Jane's acknowledgement and celebration of the traditional owners of the lands on which WEHI sits, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I find it really inspiring that they've been connected to these lands that we now call Melbourne for tens of thousands of years, while WEHI has been here for 106. I think that sets a real challenge for us. This year's theme for National Reconciliation Week is More Than a Word, Reconciliation Takes Action, which urges the reconciliation movement towards braver, more impactful action. And I'm proud to be marking this year's National Reconciliation Week by launching WEHI's first Indigenous employment strategy. The strategy outlines our vision for Indigenous employment at WEHI, and that is that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people will be engaged at the scientific frontier, making exciting discoveries and decisions about the future health in this country. And as part of that, also leading professional services workforces here at WEHI, supporting realisation of these discoveries. I'm very excited to now have a framework and action plan that identifies how we can realise this vision. It's critical that we work together with our Indigenous colleagues and communities to build the pipeline, seeking to inspire and support First Nation people to enter the sector. Because WEHI has a strong education and training focus, we're ideally placed to contribute to this aim. We have some good foundations in our recently created Indigenous Fellowship for early to mid-career researchers and a well-established Career Trackers internship program for Indigenous students that we've been participating in now for 5+ years. The Indigenous employment strategy will build upon these foundations. Importantly, as our Reconciliation Committee embarks on development of our third reconciliation plan, we are recommitting ourselves to building a culturally safe workplace and ensuring Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander staff and students are supported in their career development and have access to leadership opportunities here at WEHI and across the sector. This is my 13th AGM as WEHI Director, and I've been so excited over the last month as we've planned for this annual general meeting, which was to be our first major in-person event for nearly 16 months. My adrenaline was pumping, as it always does, ahead of the AGM, and I'm absolutely gutted that we've had to take the difficult decision today of again doing our AGM online only. My disappointment is especially acute because I'm so excited about the way we've come together as an institute to navigate the pandemic, about what our researchers have achieved in 2020, and about the way we've contributed to collaborations across the precinct nationally and internationally. I'd like to begin by very publicly acknowledging and thanking the Professional Services Leadership Group, and our COVID response team for their tireless efforts, not just in 2020, but as we've all seen in the last week, into 2021. We've responded to the pandemic in a principles-based manner. Some of the issues at the top of our mind have been, and this one is absolutely at the top of our mind, the health and safety of our staff and students, and the health and safety of our community. We've also wanted to contribute wholeheartedly to COVID-19 research and ending the pandemic. We've also wanted to keep our long-term research on track and keep our teams together by ensuring continued employment through 2020. And that was a commitment that I gave to our staff this time last year. And of course, we've also been compliant with government regulations. We could not have navigated 2020 so ably without your support as taxpayers and as donors and as supporters. Your enthusiasm for our work has given us the flexibility to respond to the pandemic in creative ways not available to many other research organisations. On behalf of everybody here, thank you. Over the next few months, I'm looking forward to sharing some remarkably generous and impactful philanthropic acts with you. Today, I'm delighted to announce that the Alfred Felton Bequest, which has a long history of supporting many different organisations in Victoria, including WEHI, is donating $1 million flagship grant to WEHI for dementia research. Starting next year, the 4-year project will supercharge our dementia research by overlaying personalised genomics to WEHI's current and future dementia projects. This highly collaborative project, involving many research areas at WEHI and multiple clinical partners, aims to develop genomic diagnostics for people with dementia that would lead to more accurate diagnosis and then therefore provide access to the most appropriate clinical trials. With our ageing population, the number of people impacted by dementia is rapidly increasing, and I'd like to thank the Felton Committee for their valued and significant support in launching this vital project, and especially acknowledge the Chair and former WEHI President, Sir Andrew Grimwade, for his leadership in driving this flagship grant. Sir Andrew and I look forward to welcoming other philanthropic partners to help accelerate this important and increasingly urgent dementia research project. In addition to our supporters in the community and our staff and students, one of the key ingredients of WEHI's success is its board, which holds management to account for delivering on our strategic plan. As part of this accountability, we report on a broad range of metrics. One important metric is publications. As a researcher, a key part of our job is to communicate the discoveries we make. The major way we do this is via peer-reviewed publications. I know it's a crude metric, which certainly doesn't tell the whole story, but it's gratifying to see our researchers publishing at as good a rate now as at any time over the last 10 years. You'll notice a big jump in the numbers around 2013 and 2014. This coincides with our expansion into our new building. And I have to say, this was not something that we took for granted, that we would see this jump in publications. We recruited primarily based on potential, and the sustained output in the last 7 years shows that our laboratory heads, our postdocs, our research assistants and our students have delivered on this potential and delivered on the trust and support you have shown. The next question we ask ourselves, and you should be asking of us, is around the quality of the papers. Does anybody care about the papers we publish? The answer is unequivocally yes. Many of our papers are published in the best journals. They are read by and influence top scientists around the world, and they are well cited. Importantly, our discoveries also influence the way the world considers the prevention, diagnosis and treatment of disease. we take our responsibility seriously to identify partners from the private sector and from the not-for-profit sector to help us progress our projects from the lab into the clinic for the benefit of the community. We have an exciting portfolio of projects at an early stage, at a preclinical stage, in clinical development, and approved for use in patients. I also want to say that we're not resting on our laurels. We're constantly looking for new ways of promoting and developing an entrepreneurial culture. We also realise that it's hard to get funding for early stage projects, those taking the first step on the translational path. And we're looking at creative ways to better fund these projects. And I look forward very much to engaging with you as we refine our ideas and then sharing these initiatives with you in the months ahead. I do want to share in some greater detail 5 publications from WEHI in 2020. The first is a collaboration led by the Deputy Director Alan Cowman, Dr. Paola Favuza, Associate Professor Justin Boddy, and Dr. Brad Sleeves, with the US-based global pharmaceutical company MSD, led by David Olson. They've successfully generated a new antimalarial compound that has proved effective in preclinical testing against several malaria species, including Plasmodium falciparum. The new compound targets a previously unexplored parasite pathway and was able to kill malaria parasites both in the blood and in the liver of infected animal models. It could also kill parasites that are resistant to current antimalarial drugs. The elegant thing about this approach is that the drug targets 2 parasite proteins, making it very unlikely the parasite will develop resistance. The other exciting aspect about this new discovery is that it prevents transmission from the blood of an infected patient back to the mosquito, an important feature as current antimalarial drugs kill the parasite in the blood but don't fully prevent transmission. This work was published in Cell, Host and Microbe, and the compound is expected to enter phase 1 clinical trials soon, including a phase 1 clinical trial in Australia, which is fantastic news. The second paper I want to highlight is the work of Dr. Charlene Nayak, Dr. Danielle Zalkenstein, and their team in collaboration with Dr. Stephen Wilcox from WEHI's Genomics Hub and Associate Professor Matthew Ritchie. It looks at blood cells using completely novel approaches. A multitude of blood cells with specific functions in the body develop from a common ancestral blood stem cell. This process is similar to the branching of a family tree. Using single-cell multiomics, this group has mapped the family tree and been able to identify new precursor cell types that give rise to both T and B lymphocytes. And those of you that have been a part of the WEHI family for a longer period will remember that they're the cells that Graham Mitchell and Jacques Miller showed collaborate to provide immunity back in the 1960s. The single-cell multiomics technology is now available widely to researchers at WEHI and elsewhere and has been applied to address more than 100 research questions. The third paper focuses on stomach cancers, which are often diagnosed at an advanced, hard-to-treat stage, with fewer than 1/3 of Australians diagnosed with this cancer surviving for 5 years. Dr. Lorraine O'Reilly, Dr. Tracy Potofsky, Professor Andreas Strasser, Dr. Juntin Loh, and clinician scientist Dr. Michael Christie discovered high levels of inflammatory factors in invasive stomach cancers, including 4 hormones known as cytokines. Of these 4, only one, the cytokine tumour necrosis factor, was found to be essential in the progression of early-stage stomach cancers to a more severe form in preclinical models. These findings, published in the journal Gastroenterology, suggests that stomach cancers may respond to medicines that inhibit TNF. TNF inhibitors have already shown success in the clinic for other diseases, particularly rheumatoid arthritis, and the research team is now looking at TNF inhibition as a potentially safe, effective way to prevent progression of stomach cancers. The fourth paper is really focused on driving better outcomes for people with anemia. WEHI clinician scientists, Associate Professor Santorain Parisha, who you'll be hearing from later this evening, and Associate Professor Jason Tydin collaborated with European colleagues to publish a new guidance on managing iron deficiency, a major cause of anemia and a serious worldwide health problem. The evidence-based guidance published in The Lancet, probably the most prestigious medical journal, outlines the best practice for clinicians to diagnose and manage iron deficiency based on data collected from recent research. Finally, I want to speak about a project which I think encapsulates 2020. A WEHI team led by Professor David Commander, Professor Mark Pellegrini, Professor Guillaume Lessine, and Dr. Teresa Clem investigated a coronavirus protein essential for hijacking human cells and found a target that could disable coronaviruses, including SARS-CoV-1 and SARS-CoV-2, that cause SARS and COVID-19, respectively. Using the Australian synchrotron's powerful X-ray beams, the team revealed the structure of this protein, called PL-PRO, to determine how it functions and interacts with human proteins, and discovered a way to block this interaction. The National Drug Discovery Centre facilitated the screening of thousands of registered drugs and drug-like compounds, and the research team found that while none of the former were effective, several compounds that had been initially developed to treat SARS were capable of halting the growth of SARS-CoV-2 in preclinical models. The findings, which were published in the EMBO journal, provide the foundation for development of these compounds into medicines that are suitable for testing in humans, with the potential of treating not only COVID-19, but other coronavirus-caused diseases. The thing I really like about this project was its speed, its dependency on collaboration, and the international flavour of the researchers who were involved. The postdoctoral fellow who spearheaded the work was Teresa Clem. She arrived in Melbourne from Germany on February the 15th, found herself a place to live, and then started at WEHI on March the 1st, just a few weeks before we went into our first COVID lockdown. She began the COVID project on March the 17th, started cloning the pieces of DNA encoding viral proteins on the 30th of March, and made her first batch of PL-PRO protein on April the 16th. The team started solving the structure at the synchrotron on May 2nd. In parallel, the chemists and the screeners had identified compounds that appeared to bind to the target protein, and these could be incorporated into the new studies. They had their paper complete and made available publicly on June 20th, 3 months after the project began. It was an amazing effort by all involved, and I heartily congratulate the entire team. This is just a small snippet of the exciting work happening within WEHI, in collaboration with partners in Australia and overseas. I wish I had 2 hours to talk to you about our science. Even better, I wish we had 2 hours for our staff and students to talk to you about their work. They are the best possible ambassadors. They're your ambassadors, and they couldn't succeed without your support. And on behalf of every one of them, I'd like to thank you.
Thank you, Doug. I'd now like to ask if Institute members have any questions for Doug or for me. Again, your questions can be submitted on Slido, and I'll pause for a moment to give our members a moment to ask any questions.
No questions, Jane.
Thank you.
I think one of the most anticipated parts of the WEHI AGM is the opportunity we have to share with you biomedical animations. And it's a real privilege for me today to be able to introduce Dr. Drew Berry, WEHI TV's Biomedical Animations Manager, and ask Drew to present his latest work of genius. Drew.
Thank you, Doug. It's always a great pleasure and honour to be able to get a chance to present a little bit of what we've been up to in the team at WEHI TV over the last year. There are two projects I'd like to highlight at this AGM that are perhaps our most visible over the last year. The first is the new Luminarium 2.0. The original Luminarium, which you can see here on the display, the original Luminarium was installed in 2015 as part of the celebration of the centenary of WEHI. It was done and created as a temporary installation, an art installation, but it ended up lasting 3 or 4 years until it really started to come to pieces. We've now replaced it and upgraded it with a beautiful piece of technology, a big upgrade of hardware and software, and which has a number of advantages over the previous Luminarium. First is that it is twice as bright as the last one, so now easily will work during the day. It now uses a third less electricity, at least, than the previous one, which is wonderful and contributes to the goals of the Institute for Sustainability, as well as it being far more reliable than the previous one. The hardware really should be 110%, much more reliable and less maintenance than it was before, which to me is a big relief. So the purpose of the Luminarium is to act as a beacon, as a lighthouse that displays a roster of images that are created in the Institute. And it's to draw the eye, to draw the public's eye as they go by at rush hour or as students gather at Melbourne University, and get them to look over at the Institute and wonder what's going on over there. All of the images are real scientific data, which are all spectacular, and this is a way to connect with the public and for them to get a sense of what goes on inside the Institute. The other obvious project we would be involved with is to create some COVID graphics to support the research at the Institute and to also help educate the public as to what this disease is about. I collaborated with Wai Hong Tam's lab in creating these sorts of graphics, and we did it very quickly with our brand new pipeline, which, well, we've been working on it for about 3 years. It's a whole new technological pipeline which we designed and created within the Institute to suit the needs of our production team at WEHI TV, and it's a completely transformative system, which I'll show you a little bit of today. And so the COVID graphics you see on the cover of the annual report, as well as this graphics here, were created with this system. First of all of the reconstruction were based on real scientific data, as is typical of all of our work at WEHI TV. It's very much informed by images like this electron microscope image made by Fred Murphy, a virologist at the CDC. What you're seeing here is the COVID virus with an electron microscope, and you see that it is not these sort of perfect spheres, but is a very stretchy, squishy bubble of lipids. And you also see the little coat of, very characteristic coat of spike proteins on the surface. So this sort of image would very much go and inform the creation of our graphics in WEHI TV. We now have a brand new pipeline where we're able to incorporate many forms of data, cryo-EM, molecular dynamic simulation, like the one you're seeing here, and other forms of data into our animation system. And what you're seeing here is provided by Dr. Mike Kuiper at Data 61 CSIRO at Docklands, just nearby. He's a frequent collaborator of ours. He provided this simulation, a molecular dynamics simulation of the head of the spike of COVID virus. And what you're seeing is a 300-frame calculation, molecular dynamics calculation of the spike, the top of the spike. And the blue molecules are sugar molecules. So each frame of this simulation is 1 femtosecond, so 1 quadrillionth of a second, or 1 millionth of a billionth of a second. And we have 300 frames, which we're then able to acquire and bring into our animation software. And every spike you see in the animation and in the images are derived from this simulation. We then, because that head of the spike is only part of the whole spike protein, we look at other forms of research, and this is a beautiful paper from Science where they're looking directly and measuring the shape and the conformations of the spike. And what it's telling me is that that head you saw before is on a long stalk that has various particular articulations. In the bottom right-hand corner, you see this pink image where they describe it as a hip and knee and ankle, these articulation points of the spike. And that we will then incorporate into our visualization. Phil Pim, who works, he's a postdoc in Waihong Tam's lab, provided these models of the nanobodies and the antibodies. We were able to bring them in, but not only that, these are static models that were given, but because we know about the articulation and dynamics of the antibody, we can add that as a veneer to show you the sorts of movements and behaviors that these sorts of molecules would show. And that gets incorporated directly into the animation. So I'm now going to present you with some images and also an animation from that's been generated with this system. This is a close-up of one of the spike proteins with a couple of the antibodies that were generated by Waihong Tam's lab, attaching and binding in the right places to the spike. And what that will do is block the entry and the attachment of the virus to cells and prevent the whole cycle, the life cycle of the virus. So that's this particular image. And we also have it dynamically represented in an animation. And this is a combination of both simulation and animation to show the nature of what this virus is about. We have a dynamic virus capsid, the virus coat, and it's stretching and flexing, and all the arms, the spikes are all flexing as we'd expect. And you have these beautiful pink butterflies, which are the antibodies coming in and attaching and doing, preventing the virus from attaching to cells. So we are able to generate these sorts of graphics very, very quickly, and it used to be well beyond the capacity of our computers, but now it's all actually done in game engine. So these are all real-time worlds we're now able to create. And I got a little bit enthusiastic when I heard Waihong describe this as an antibody cocktail, so I kept on dialing it up. And it came to this point where Waihong said, whoa, 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 it's not quite that much. But it does make for spectacular, engaging science communication for the public and for students to have a sense of what's going on and what's being discovered in the Institute. And so I encourage you to explore the Augmented Reality app that is associated or attached to the annual report. If you look at the back page, back cover of the annual report, or online, we also have details of how to download an app for your smartphone. And if it transforms many of the images in the annual report. The cover image becomes an animation, but also lots of figures of microscopy and molecular models within the annual report come alive and are just a fascinating layer of information that a normal traditional annual report wouldn't normally present. So with that, I'm finished. Thank you.
Not quite the same without the gasps and the round of applause that normally accompany what Drew produces. But as usual, Drew, your team's produced brilliant work, beautiful, scientifically accurate, inspiring, and I know it's going to do as much as anything that we do here in encouraging people to consider medical research as a career and informing the public. Brilliant job. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce Associate Professor Santrain Parisha, who is Joint Division Head of Population Health and Immunity, and Santa, as we call him, is going to give the Agm Scientific Presentation. Santa.
Thank you very much, Doug. It's a real pleasure to be invited to come along and present our work tonight. Before I start, of course, I also would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're meeting today and pay my respect to their elders past, present and emerging, particularly as we enter Reconciliation Week this week. So my group works on the global burden of anemia, and as many of you will know, red blood cells carry oxygen bound to haemoglobin around our body. And anemia is a state when we start running out of that, when the haemoglobin concentration becomes too low and insufficient to meet oxygen requirements. And in this case, symptoms may include fatigue, lethargy, irritability, shortness of breath, a pounding headache, and also people may become pale. You can see a normal conjunctiva on the top right of this picture, and in the centre you can see a child I actually looked after when I worked in East Timor who's got severe anemia. You can see how pale their conjunctiva are. People who have other medical conditions such as ischemic heart disease may experience exacerbations of that, for example, chest pain or heart failure. Now, this is a healthy blood film, and you can see the red blood cells here look, well, to me they look happy. They've got plenty of hemoglobin. The central disc is only one-third along, one-third wide. But a child with anemia may have many different causes for that. You can see on the left a case of iron deficiency. Look how small those red blood cells are, how empty they are. Some of them, you see a few elongated red blood cells. So these are iron-deficient red blood cells. But anemia could also be because of malaria. And you can see some parasites sitting inside some of the red blood cells. This is from a patient actually from the Royal Melbourne Hospital. And you can also see on the far right image a case of sickle cell disease. Look at some of those red blood cells that are elongated. Those are sickled red blood cells due to a genetic condition that affects hemoglobin. But the most common cause of anemia around the world, particularly in young kids and in pregnancy, is iron deficiency, which looks like it seems to explain about half of anemia around the world. And why is that? It's because the first 1,000 days of life, the time from conception through pregnancy and then up to the second year of life, are a period of both vulnerability to iron deficiency and also of consequence from iron deficiency. And vulnerability in pregnancy may be because a woman may enter pregnancy already iron deficient. She may have a low iron intake during her pregnancy, especially if she lives in a food-insecure environment. And she has a high iron requirement because she needs to get iron for her own blood cells, as well as for the developing tissues of her placenta and for the fetus. And the consequences of iron deficiency in babies are serious. In pregnancy are serious. There's an increased risk of maternal death, especially around the time of delivery, particularly because of postpartum hemorrhage. But other important consequences of anemia and iron deficiency in pregnancy include a baby being born too soon or being born too small. And as well as that, there are concerns that there may be impaired fetal brain development. Meanwhile, in young kids, those consequences can also increase the risk for babies. So there can be an increased risk. A low birth weight baby or a premature baby receives less iron from mum and then is at risk of iron deficiency themselves. As well as that, babies may receive, again because of food insecurity, iron-poor complementary foods. Inflammation due to infections may prevent iron from accessing the bloodstream. And a child, as we all know, grows so fast, they may consume all the iron that's available to them. And we're concerned that iron deficiency in young kids can impair brain development, as well as putting them at risk of infections due to poor immune development and mortality. So anemia is common even here in Australia. 1 in 5 pregnant women in Australia are anemic, and just under 1 in 5 kids under the age of 5. Worldwide, that prevalence of anemia is higher, so it rises to about a third of pregnant women and 2 out of every 5 children under the age of 5. But once we get into Asia, for example, about half of all pregnant women are anemic and half of all kids. And in sub-Saharan Africa, indeed, 3 out of every 5 children under the age of 5 are anemic. So my lab tries to really understand and resolve this problem. And we take a holistic approach, a basic biologic approach. We have biologists working on the biology of iron regulation and red blood cell production. We do translational studies. I'm going to speak to you in a moment about my global health trials program, and we try to turn all of this into evidence for policy. So the 2 groups we try to study in our global health trials program are pregnant women and babies. And here we're really trying to understand what are the risks and benefits of iron interventions in these populations. The potential benefits might be in pregnancy, improved neonatal outcomes such as birth weight, improved maternal outcomes and also well-being for the mother, and of course long-term child development. In infancy, the risks might be that the benefits might be improved child development and growth. And what are the risks of giving iron? Well, iron is also essential for the proliferation of pathogens, so iron could actually exacerbate the risk of infection. And along with that, actually just giving any medication or drug has a safety risk, and we need to make sure these are balanced. So the question that my lab spends a lot of time thinking about is it actually worth going ahead and giving iron in these populations? And we need to think about these in the two regions of the world where it's most common. In sub-Saharan, in Asia, where I showed you the high prevalence anemia, but also where there's not that much malaria, for example. And of course in sub-Saharan Africa, where again there's heaps of anemia, lots of anemia, and the biology may be different. Now I'll talk to you about our program in children. So if you want to give iron to babies, there's really two ways that are recommended in public health. One is through iron drops, and the other is through home fortification of food through something called multiple micronutrient powders, which allow families to fortify and strengthen the amount of iron in the food at home. But there's actually remarkably little evidence on what the functional clinical benefits and the safety of these interventions are in real life. And so we set ourselves the goal of defining the benefits and harms of daily iron supplementation and micronutrient powders in young kids to enable evidence-based recommendations for iron interventions in this group. We've recently completed the benefits and risks of iron interventions in children, or BRISC trial, in rural Bangladesh, which is of course part of South Asia. And in this trial, we randomised 3,300 babies, 1,100 per arm, to iron drops, to placebo, or to multiple micronutrient powders. And this was a double-dummy placebo-controlled trial, so nobody, not the families, not the testers, not the members of the field team, the statisticians or ourselves, knew what any particular child was receiving. We did detailed assessments of children before we provided the interventions, and then again at the end of interventions, and then we followed them up for a period afterwards to see if there's any sustained effect. Along with that, we undertook detailed assessments of safety, for example, infection risk. And I'll show you here the field site. This was about 50 kilometres outside Dhaka in Bangladesh. And you can see our field team going from village to village and from household to household, collecting data and looking after the families on our trial. You can also see the labs that we set up in the field to collect and process samples, and one of the participants of our trial. The primary outcome of this trial was child development measured by the Bailey scales for infant and toddler development, which might be the same tool that, if any of you are worried about the development of your child, if you went to the children's hospital, they might do exactly the same test for your child. It takes an hour, and we had 10 testers who collectively did over almost 10,000 tests across the study to carefully measure the effects of the intervention on child developmental potential. We hope the results of this trial will be available for publication very soon. What about in sub-Saharan Africa? Here there are differences. It's a malaria endemic setting. There are differences to the nutritional intake and in the population. The population itself is different and the health systems are different. So we feel that we need to address this question directly in that setting as well. And here we're running the Iron with Malaria Prevention, or Irma trial. And this is a similar trial where we're looking at the effects of iron interventions on child functional outcomes, particularly child development. But on top of that, we're also looking at the effects of preventing malaria with antimalarials to see if that in itself can actually boost child growth and development. And we should have the results of that trial, I hope, by the end of next year. What about in pregnancy? Here, the evidence is a bit more secure that iron supplementation is important in pregnancy. We do have good data that iron improves anemia, birth weight, and gestation duration. But the key issue is that adherence to iron supplementation in sub-Saharan Africa and other low-income settings is poor. And that's because it's quite difficult to take iron, and it requires an extended contact with the healthcare system. But here in Australia and other Western countries, we're starting to change and pivot to using high-dose intravenous iron formulations. Many of you may have even received these yourselves. Ferric carboxymaltose is a drug that allows us to give 1,000 milligrams of iron in just 15 minutes. And it's safe, and it's effective, and we use it 8 or 10 times a day in the hospital. So we thought, what if this could be used, and what would it be like to use this in the field? And so we're the first to be trialling using these modern IV iron formulations to treat anemia in pregnancy in a low-income setting. The Revamp Trial is a second trimester trial where we've randomised 862 women who were anemic to either oral iron as standard of care or a single dose of this intravenous iron formulation. You can see one of our participants receiving the drug in our trial health centre. Recruitment to this trial is completed, and we should know more by the end of this year, and it's funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The outcomes we're looking at are anemia, but beyond that, birth weight, gestation duration, outcomes that are really important to the mothers and to the families. Pregnancy emergencies such as postpartum hemorrhage or emergency hospital admission, and other things and other extended outcomes such as postpartum depression and infant growth and development. We've been fortunate to be funded to now go beyond this trial and look at the third trimester when pregnancy is when labour is just a few weeks away. Can we get that haemoglobin up and prevent an adverse outcome just as when delivery comes? And beyond that, we're also trying now to go outside our research setting in the hospital in Zomba in Malawi and into the health centres. And you can see here, Linkagala Health Centre in Malawi, in rural Malawi, we're actually delivering this trial out in the field. And finally, because, as I said before, South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa have many aspects different, we need to develop regionally relevant evidence. And so the Gates Foundation have now funded us to also undertake a study in rural Bangladesh, where again, we will look at 900 women and randomise them to oral iron and intravenous iron and see if we can improve these critical outcomes as delivery comes. And then beyond that, into the first year of life for mother and postpartum for mother and the first year of life for the baby. And beyond that, we've also been asked to actually see if we can demonstrate the use of this drug to the government. And so we're taking over the healthcare system and the anemia screening system for 300,000 people in a district of rural Bangladesh. And there we will screen women in pregnancy and see if we can develop a system to deliver this, meaning that our results won't just be a nice paper, but also something that can be translated into practice. But beyond this, we also undertake biology with the work we're doing with these studies. So beyond the clinical trials and the evidence we'll get from them, we're also, with the ethics and full consent of all the participants, collecting samples, bringing them back here to Melbourne, where we undertake, where we can use the technologies available here at WEHI. For example, the genomics, transcriptomics, immunology, microbiome work, proteomics, and even advanced imaging, to try to discover new mechanisms of disease for conditions faced by people living in low-income settings, and also to discover new biomarkers that may help us better assess these conditions. And finally, we're fortunate that we've been designated by the World Health Organization as the WHO Collaborating Centre for Anemia Detection and Control. And our role here will be to support the WHO in compiling evidence to support anemia control policies and to support WHO in how they go about measuring and determining the prevalence of anemia worldwide. And just to say, this is obviously a big program, and we have big teams in Malawi and in Bangladesh who've been supporting this work, along with a big team here in Melbourne, both mentors, collaborators and colleagues, and of course my lab, which comprises of biologists, biostatisticians, epidemiologists, program managers, and I thank them all so much for their support, along with, of course, the funders, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the National Health and Medical Research Council here in Australia, and donors such as the Guak Hua Wang Charitable Trust for supporting some of our translational work. Thank you very much.
Santi, I have a question. Is discrete iron deficiency a cause of stunting?
It probably, that's a very specialised question. Now, very briefly, I don't think it is. I think it might be the other way, that growth may actually be a cause, rapid growth may actually be a cause of iron deficiency due to consumption of iron.
Fantastic work, Santa. Congratulations, and hearty congratulations to the whole team on the WHO designation. I'm sure it wasn't fortunate. I'm sure it was a lot of hard work and developing those links with communities and demonstrating that the work you do can have such powerful outcomes. So congratulations. Finally, I'd like to introduce Professor Marnie Blewett, who is Joint Division Head, Epigenetics and Development and Head of Scientific Education, to present the Metcalf Scholarship Awards and the Professor Lin Corcoran PhD Prizes. Marnie.
Thank you, Doug. So it's a pleasure today to be able to introduce the winners of the Metcalf Scholarships, both for 2020 and 2021. So the Metcalf Scholarship Fund was established in honour of our beloved Institute researcher, Professor Don Metcalfe, who passed away at the end of 2014. The scholarships support students to be able to get their first experience, their first taste of research, which we all think is something that Don would have really loved. So Metcalf Scholars are awarded a research placement in one of our many top-ranking research labs, and they're investigating projects that have to do with any of the research themes within our institute, so cancer, infectious diseases, immunology, developmental disorders, or age-related syndromes. So since 2014, we've had 18 passionate, motivated, and really bold young Metcalf scholars come through the labs and train with our scientific teams. So thanks to the generous support of the many donors that have made a gift in memory of Don, the Metcalf Scholarships are an ongoing highlight both of the AGM and, of course, of the research and education around the Institute. This year, I'm really pleased to be able to announce 17 new Metcalf Scholars, and so 8 of them were 2020 scholars and 9 are the 2021 scholars. Last year, we weren't able to announce the 2020 winners because we had a delayed round for obvious reasons, because of COVID, and so I'm going to announce them tonight. And all of those 8 have already started their work over the past 12 months. So the 2020 Metcalf Scholars are Rachel Evans. She's working in infectious diseases and immune defence with Anna Cousins. Ayushi Kilan in blood cells and blood cancer with David Huang. Rachel Lim in epigenetics and development with Matt Ritchie, Stella Liu in the ACRF Cancer Biology and Stem Cells Division with Kate Sutherland, Oscar Liu in the Blood Cells and Blood Cancer Division with Andrea Strasser, Albert Shen in Blood Cells and Blood Cancer with Gemma Kelly, Timothy Tian in Structural Biology with Matt Call, and Phil Yang in the Epigenetics and Development Division also with Matt Ritchie. So congratulations to all those 2020 winners. So this year we welcome another 9 scholars, and the 2021 Metcalf scholars are Rita Bandari, Patrick Grave, Tian Kellett, Zoe Lee, Gillian Liu, Christopher Sparks, Raylin Tong, Laura Wen, and Joshua Yong. So we welcome all of them, and we're really excited to have them start the research at the Institute. So the next award to be presented is the Lin Corcoran Award for the best PhD that was passed in 2020. The Corcoran Award was established in 2017 to recognise the outstanding PhD students that WEHI has. The award honours Professor Lin Corcoran and her tireless contributions to the development and education of WEHI students. So she has been at the Institute for more than 30 years as a student and a postdoc and a lab head, and she's been an inspirational mentor to many, particularly to young women coming through the labs. So this year I'm going to announce 2 winners. The first is Dr. Catherine Davies. So she's from the Structural Biology Division and the Inflammation Division. Her supervisors were James Murphy, Peter Sabatar, and Emma Petrie, and her PhD title was Mechanistic Studies of Mechanistic Studies of MLKL-mediated cell death. The second awardee for the Lin Corcoran Award is Dr. James Whittle from the ACRF Cancer Biology and Stem Cells Division. His supervisors were Jane Visveda and Jeff Lindemann, and his title was Cell Survival Pathways and Mechanisms of Response in Breast Cancer. So again, congratulations both to James Whittle and Catherine Davies and all of the Metcalf scholars as well. Thanks very much.
It's wonderful to be able to support young scholars in this way, and so exciting to see the work that they're doing. Before we finish up for the evening, I'd like to mention a special birthday coming up. On the 4th of June, Sir Gustav Nossel will be celebrating his 90th birthday. Of course, at WEHI, a birthday is a time for enthusiastic celebrations, and the more so for such a landmark birthday. There will be opportunities in the coming months for staff, students and the wider WEHI community to wish Gus many happy returns, but I'm sure I speak for everyone when I wish Gus a very happy birthday for next week. Thank you all for your virtual attendance this evening. I know the current COVID-19 situation in Melbourne and many places is worrying for many of you, and I send you my very best wishes. I very much hope that we'll see you in person at our WEHI AGM in 2022. Good night.